For this evening's talk, as I said, I've just been busy last week teaching a retreat and all sorts of other stuff. Just came back on Tuesday afternoon. Yeah, and just looking after monastery, all the stuff there and other stuff. And on Sunday, going to New York. Oh, I work too hard. The reason I'm going to New York is poor Mr. Trump, he needs some help. I don't know, get the bad joke out of the way first of all about Mr. Trump. I didn't say this 2 weeks ago when he went to visit the Pope. That was 2 weeks ago, I said that, did I? Okay, 2 weeks ago you know that Donald Trump went to have an audience with His Holiness the Pope. We didn't know much about what was actually said in private between them, but apparently he was complaining about he always gets bad press. And so the Pope said he'd see what he can do. And so later on when he returned to the White House, he got a call from His Holiness the Pope, and that he said, well, I talked with the boss and we got an idea. Just to impress people that you've got divine support. Walk outside of the White House and walk on that lake, the big lake in front of the White House. And you'll find actually you can walk on water. That should impress the New York Times. And so he tried it, and the next day he walked on water. The next day the New York Times in the headline saying, Trump more incompetent than we thought, he can't even swim. Sometimes you just can't win, whether you deserve to or not. But no, I'm just going there to do some teaching, not for that. But not really having anything planned for this evening, to what I'm going to talk about, just picking up on some things which people talked to me about beforehand. Two people, they came across and said, just how do you deal when these people are very angry and violent right in front of you? Because when 2 or 3 people say that, just one after the other, I thought that's a great subject for the talk. How do you deal? That one person was in a bus and somebody was threatening to smash the driver. Another person was seeing another altercation right in front of them and just getting emotionally entangled in it. So, how can we resolve conflict, arguments between people we really respect? And how can we actually do that? And we obviously, each one of us, from time to time, just gets people criticizing us or shouting at us, and even like trying to be violent at us. How do you deal with that? And sometimes even as a monk that happens to me, without any sort of seeking out conflict or violence. There was 2 times, two stories. The first story was when we first moved into this complex at Nolamara 32 years ago. And we did a grand opening ceremony here. Even though we still owed a lot of money for just purchasing this place, we decided to have a big grand opening ceremony. And we thought, nothing to lose, let's try inviting the then governor. It was Sir Gordon Reed, a really great guy. That's the Reed Highway, was named after him. And he was the Chancellor of UWA before, and very, very lovely personality, not sort of proud or demanding or anything, but he's a very great guy to be with. So anyway, I had the job of organizing the marquees, the tables, the chairs, and I was told by the committee at the time, Ajahn Brahm, don't worry about the expense. We'll pay it off later, just to make sure we put on a good show. So what I did, I rang around, wanted to get the best quality. We had the governor coming. So I got a place, I think it was in Cottesloe, hiring to expensive parties in Peppermint Grove and Dalkeith, to the really rich people. And I said, we want the best, doesn't matter about the cost, because we're having a big show at our Buddhist center. And that was the instructions. And when the tents, the big marquee, and the tables and chairs arrived, I actually wanted about 10 VIP chairs, nice comfortable ones. I was busy helping somebody else, so I never saw them unload. And I checked on afterwards, and that marquee was covered with red dust. It was filthy. Now, you don't complain. This is something which I've always learned, always try and practice. Rather light a candle than complain about darkness. It's easy to complain, it should be like this, it should be like that. No, just do something about it yourself. So, or if you can't do it yourself, get your slaves and servants. I've got other people to clean, to clean the tent. They got hoses out, they washed it down. And then they started complaining about the chairs. The chairs were also filthy. That can be solved. Get some wet rags and just wipe them all down. Just the event, this was on a Friday, the event was going to be on a Sunday, plenty of time. But then we got the problem of the VIP chairs. A dozen of them. And those VIP chairs, it wasn't something we could solve by wiping it down or washing them. Because the legs, chairs have 4 legs. None of those 12 chairs had legs the same size. They wobbled. I mean, not just a little bit, I mean really wobbled. They'd obviously thought these Buddhists were stupid and we can get rid of anything on these people. So, that's what I thought at the time. So, this was a problem you can't solve by lighting a candle. So I had to complain. So I think I ran to the office, got on the telephone, and I managed just to catch the manager just before she closed up the offices, Friday. And when I called her, I said, don't you remember the conversation? Oh yeah, I remember that. What's happened? I said, look, there was filthy marquee, filthy chairs, and the chairs, the VIP ones, are not the same length. Every one of them wobbles a lot. We can't have the governor and his wife falling over and injuring themselves doing a Buddhist ceremony. That is not sort of impressive. So, she said, oh, there must have been some big mistake. I'll get them changed now because they don't work on Saturdays. So, I was very happy. But I never realized what it means to change all those tables and chairs. It meant they had to get their workers back to send more chairs and replace them with the old ones. Friday afternoon in Perth, after they worked, they'd all knocked off work, and their boss walked into the pub saying, guys, the Buddhists need their chairs replaced. So you can imagine the reactions of Australians, not Buddhists, who were called to help us out, and they're already in the middle of their evening drinking. So I was waiting for them, because this time you had to check that everything was correct. I was waiting for them just at the top of the road here, and I saw them, the truck turn the corner, going pretty fast. And it was going, I don't know how fast it was going, but it hadn't slowed down. And one of these guys, these big Australian guys, came out, and he jumped out of the moving truck. And he ran, he had his fist up like this. Where's the bloke in charge? I want the bloke in charge. And so I walked up to him and said, I am the bloke in charge. It's nice being a monk, you're a bit fearless. I've got health insurance, so it doesn't matter if I spend a few days in hospital, I can get some rest. And so I remember this moment clearly. He had his fist in front of me like this, about that far away, in front of my nose, right in front of me, there. And his eyes were just big and red. And I could smell the beer, from his breath. I've never, ever actually imbibed so much beer since I became a monk through my nostrils. You can smell it there. And he was there. Ugh. Where's the bloke in charge? But it was amazing just how you can diffuse conflict so easy. I was not having an attitude of superiority. That would have actually just broken my nose straight away. But no fear either. Just total stillness and peacefulness. And that was a wonderful experience. Everybody, Mr. President, you weren't here then, so you're excused, but there's a few other people who were sitting here who were here at the time. You saw me there, just about to get my lights punched out, as they say in Australia. Did anyone come to help me? No. Not at all. That's what friends are for. Just to gawk. See what would happen. But I didn't need any help. Because I totally in total control of the situation. He just had his hand in front of me, big red eyes, just breathing alcohol. And I just stood there. Peaceful, kind. Not superior, not arrogant, but just kind, opening the door of my heart to that moment, letting it be, not moving, not reacting. And that was the key, not reacting. Because in conflict there's a well-worn psychological path to actually increase that conflict. Yeah, you and whose army? Me and my army? We have this little, for want of a better word, foreplay, before actually you start punching one another. And it's well known what that foreplay is, and just how you cause one another to get more and more to a point of no return. And I never even got close to that point of no return. I was not reacting in the usual way. I was doing unexpected stuff. And because it was unexpected, this guy didn't know what to do next. He was frozen. And it was an amazing situation because you really did feel, and I did know, I had that guy totally under my control. He couldn't back down, but he couldn't go any further. This was the amazing psychology of just being aware and being kind, because that's very unusual in this world. It does calm people down. And it was there maybe 3 or 4 minutes until the car parked, the truck parked in front of this building here. And then one of his friends, the boss, the foreman, I suppose you'd call him, he came out to us and he put his hand on his friend's shoulder. He was actually frozen there. And said, come on, let's unload the chairs. I said, yeah, I'll come and help you. So we unloaded the chairs together. No violence at all, no conflict. Simply because you did not feed that conflict. A fire needs more fuel to keep on going. The electricity needs more amps to keep it warm. If you don't feed it, it's amazing just how much power you have to stop that heat which causes the conflict. Now maybe I can do that because I've been a monk for many years, but you can do pretty much the same by diffusing stuff. You also know that lovely story of the, don't want to say it too often, about one of those disciples in Sydney who was having a meeting in London in order to sign a contract to take her business much, much further. That was the one with the CEO. As soon as she arrived, she had to leave her baby Holly over in Sydney. When I was in Sydney recently, I didn't see Julie, but saw her husband and asked about Holly. She's now a 13 or 14-year-old girl. It just makes me feel really old. All these little kids, I remember blessing them when they're little babies. And now there's sort of mothers and grandmothers, and crikey, how old am I? But anyway, that she told me this story. She had to leave a little baby in Sydney and just fly at a moment's notice all the way to London to sign this very, very important contract. And as soon as she arrived, checked into her hotel, got changed, went to the boardroom, and as soon as she went into the boardroom, the other directors told her, "You've wasted your time. You might as well just go back on the next plane to Sydney." Because the managing director is in a very, very bad mood, very, very angry. He's been in conflict with all of us today, shouting, screaming, swearing at us. We know him, he's not in the mood to sign your contract. But Julie, just give her all credit, she said, "Well, come all this way, might as well see the guy." And so she was a meditator. So she just sat down in a corner of the boardroom and just closed her eyes and started doing loving kindness meditation, which was her way of meditating. And she'd only been meditating there for about 10 minutes when the boss came into the room. "Who's she? What's she doing in my boardroom? What on earth is she doing?" Now I often say whenever you give public talks, you notice just how changing the tone of your voice wakes people up. So you can't fall asleep. So words, the tone has enormous power. And anyway, that really sort of got sort of Julie out of her meditation. She stood up and she was so calm and peaceful that sort of harsh words which usually make you upset, she didn't buy into at all. She just stood up and walked straight towards that CEO and she said, as you said many times here, that she didn't premeditate this. It has to come natural, not sort of thought out. She said to the CEO, "Wow, you have such beautiful blue eyes, just like my baby back in Sydney." Now, when somebody gets angry at you and wants to, again, punch out your lights, to hit you, to be angry at you, they don't expect to be praised, to be told how beautiful your eyes are. I don't think anyone had ever said that to that CEO. And it worked. It totally diffused the situation. The foreplay of conflict had been stopped, which meant that after a few minutes of total confusion, that CEO replied with a smile, "Really? I've got beautiful blue eyes. Ah, what a lovely thing to say." And she had her contract signed within a few minutes. And that's actually how to diffuse the conflict. It's weird, but if it really is sincere fearlessness and kindness, you find that people just cannot cope with that, and they respect it. And sometimes it just, the violence, the conflict doesn't happen at all. I've had many, many examples of that. Of course, the times it doesn't work I don't hear about, because I don't live to tell the tale. But no, it certainly is an interesting way of dealing with stuff. So if you ever do find, especially if somebody has shouting at you, please find a different way to react than the normal way of fear and aggression back. Do something different. The actual story I wanted to tell, which I've just forgot about, just remembered now, was the time when I used to go, reminded me of going to prisons, and just that sort of plug for what Drew was saying, just how amazing it is going to teach in prisons. I actually learned so much there, because one of the things I respected about the prisons I taught, they never gave you any bullshit. They were always straight up, straight down. They were honest. They said that in here, if you try and be something you're not, we'll tell you straight away. You be honest. It's a strange thing, but people are much more honest in prison than they are in the outside world. Because they've got nothing to lose, they've got nothing to show, they've got nothing to try and be proud about. I found them more open and more honest and straightforward. Anyway, that was just my experience. So anyway, I was teaching down in prison in Bunbury, and in the afternoon I used to go and meditate on the beach. And when I was meditating on the beach one day, just quietly, I heard the whiz of a stone passing by my ear. I realized someone was throwing stones at me. And then another one went over my head. And another one went even closer. And realized that, you had to do something, because sooner or later one of those stones would hit me. And I don't have any padding on my head. So I'm much more vulnerable. So, what did I do? I realized I had to get up. And instead of running away, because if you remember the time, there was this person called Bhagawan Sri Rajneesh, now called Osho, but now passed away, but he was wanting to move here into Western Australia. And of course it was great media. People were just always, interested in him. And his, was it Ma Sheila, wasn't it? She was the front woman, and she was always very nasty on the media. And so they really gave people a very bad reputation, and gave anything Eastern religion a bad reputation. And so, everyone was painted with the same brush. So when they saw me, they shouted out, "Get off the beach, you Rajneeshi!" And so instead of running away, you have to do something a little bit different. I decided to turn around and walk towards them. And it was about half a dozen, or maybe no more than that, maybe about 8 or 9, young men, maybe about 16 or 17. And so as soon as I started to walk towards them, they all ran away. They were run away because they thought, who is this guy who's not afraid of people throwing stones at them? They had much more power than I had. But I ran towards them, and one actually turned around and just was interested. And they walked towards me. So he said, "Look, I'm not a Rajneesh, I'm a Buddhist monk. We're very pacifist. We don't sort of harm anybody. You shouldn't just go throwing stones at people." And even if they were Rajneeshi. And it's amazing, they just listened, and they really respected who I was and how I reacted to that situation. And of course, what happened was I faced them instead of running the opposite way, doing something they never expected. Now that is actually how a lot of conflict can be overcome, by doing the unexpected. The reason is that we're such creatures of habit. This is one of the reasons why we do encourage the practice of things like mindfulness. We can see just how we just almost predictable the way we react. That's why they say you've got buttons, and people keep pushing your buttons. It may be your partner, it may be your mother-in-law, whatever it is, pushing buttons. And how can they do that? It's only because you're predictable in the way you behave. So because of that, the mindfulness, one of its reasons is it gives you choices, more choices. It's like a lot of life, you don't know really what you're doing. You go through the same door, the same way home, the same way of, I often say, like brushing your teeth, for example. When you brush your teeth, what part of the mouth do you start from? Is it the top left, or the middle, or the bottom right? Which do? You find out that most of you will always start the same place. Every morning, every afternoon or evening, no matter how many times you brush your teeth. Sorry. Bit of mindfulness. Know where you start. This evening, start somewhere else. Do it differently. As I often say when I tell this story, live on the wild side. Brush your teeth in a different place. Now that is not just means you're more awake, when actually you're doing a simple job. It means also you're getting the ability to be aware of your habitual reactions, why you always do things in the same way, why you've got buttons which people can press anyway, why it is you can't do different things, which always get you into trouble every time, which always causes that conflict. So yeah, you know that there's conflict situations, so maybe do things differently. There's one of the other stories, which I think this was in the book called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. And it was a person who, he wrote this story somewhere, he wrote this story somewhere, so I can leave it down there, it's okay. So I leave this, he was writing a story which he read, and I remember reading in another magazine somewhere, about a gentleman who was in Japan studying martial arts. And of course, real martial arts should only be used for training out of compassion, not sort of using aggressively. And he was in a crowded train, and I forget what particular martial arts it was, Taekwondo or I don't know if it was karate, but anyway, he was highly sort of skilled in that art, but had some restraint, only use it for kindness or for personal training. But he saw this drunken Japanese guy come on the train and just push his way past a pregnant woman. The pregnant woman fell on the floor. And he thought, this now is a justification. He can actually show off his martial arts. So he went up to this guy, and this guy sort of squared up to him. And he said, you shouldn't do that. And he said, I'm going to teach you some manners. And there's about to be a fight. And this old gentleman in the back of the train sort of came up, touched this drunken man on the shoulder and said, come and have some sake with me. He had a little bottle with him. And so the drunkard, would always like some more sake. So he left the martial arts expert alone and sat down on a chair with him. And he started saying something like, my wife, who passed away some time ago, we always used to sit out in the afternoon, in the late evening, having a little sake together. He said it with much kindness, and this drunken man started to cry. And he said his wife too had died only a few months ago, and he was so depressed and upset he'd lost his job, and that's why he took solace in alcohol. And saying the story there, why the violence started, finding another way of dealing with it. This is classic Buddhism. We don't just try and solve problems, violence with more violence, anger with more anger, tension with more tension. We try and find its cause. And once we know the cause, then we can find the solution. We don't use force. This I learned when I went to see one of the most famous Thai meditation masters, who was the teacher of His Majesty the late King of Thailand. It's a monk called Ajahn Brahm. I spent a few weeks with him. And while I was there, my Thai was perfect at that time. It's declined since because I don't have as much time to practice it. But he decided to give a talk, and in the talk in Thai he said it was for me, this Western monk who just come. And the part I remember there was self-deprecating. He said that his teacher was a famous Ajahn Mun, who was Ajahn Chah's teacher. And he was staying with him and practicing with this great Ajahn Mun. And like many monks at that time, living in the forest, in the jungle, he got malaria. Nearly all the monks had malaria in those days. It was just, as I say, the occupational hazard, living in the jungle. You can't do much about it. So this monk, Ajahn Brahm, he was really a tough fellow, one of the toughest fellows, toughest monks I've ever seen. So when he had his malaria fever, instead of just relaxing, resting, when it came to the work period in the monastery, he got out of his sick bed, put some clothes on, and went down to help the other monks do some sweeping, right in the middle of a fever, using his willpower to control his body. And imagine if you've ever had a very, very strong fever, even standing up, you're very shaky on your feet, you haven't got no energy. But, he had incredible willpower. Probably one of the most I've ever seen. And he picked up a broom and started sweeping, wobbly on his feet, but he was going to do it. At which point his teacher, this Ajahn Brahm, saw him and said, "That is not the way. Your way is using willpower. That's not the Buddhist way. Your way is to investigate, to understand the cause and effect, not to control stuff, but to understand life." And to me that was very important, coming from such a strong monk. How important it is, not when you're facing a situation, not to try and control it or fight it with aggression or wisdom, but to understand, where is this coming from? Why? What feeds it? And what lessens it? Just like I was teaching, when you're relaxing the body, you got an irritation in your throat, which is now gone. What makes that irritation worse? What lessens it? Here you learn conflict resolution. The conflict you have with the sicknesses in the body. The conflict you have with your mind, which makes you tense and stressed. You understand what makes that piezometer, the needle, go down. You're very peaceful. What makes it more agitated? What worsens the situation? You're learning how the conflict in your own mind with life, what causes it. And once you understand that, the conflict in life between two people, you can understand what causes that. Why do good people argue? People you fall in love, and this is something which I sometimes wonder, why can't people learn this? Two people, they meet together, they fall in love, and I do the marriage service for them. And I know them, I respect them, they're very, very good people. They're not perfect people, but they're good enough. And I can see their kindness, but there comes to a point they can't see any kindness in one another. Those of you who've been in failed relationships, especially when you've been married and you have the trauma of a divorce, why do people act that way? There's such a conflict between one another. Blaming is one of the things. Understand that even relationships don't last. Everything passes white. Sometimes it goes past its use-by date. Sometimes it's because the old simile, a glass is fragile, it's got a crack in it, because I know it's not going to last. That is why I don't take it for granted, that's why I care for it. I don't sort of put this in a place where it's likely to sort of be broken. Because I know it one day it will be broken. Because relationships will one day pass, you know they're not going to last forever. That is why I care for it. If I assume this was unbreakable, if this is my soulmate, we're meant to be, and you assume that that's the case, then of course you're not really paying much attention and care, taking things for granted. And that's why it keeps on breaking. If you realize it's going to break for the first time you meet, then it will last much longer. Just like this glass lasts much longer because I care for it, because I know it's going to break. That is one of the reasons we're just stupid sometimes. Take people for granted instead of realizing that caring is such a powerful way of solving conflict. Not curing, but caring. Not using willpower, but using wisdom power to understand. And the way we do that, using wisdom power, a lot of the time with conflict, we're just so narrow-minded and fault-finding. By narrow-minding and fault-finding, the simile is, my hand is so big I can't see anybody. All I can see is my hand. The conflict, the one thing which is upsetting you, is so close to you, you obsess about it. So you can't see anything else. When you actually see the full picture, the big picture, I've never met anybody who needs to be who's a hopeless case. And I make this point because there's many people who come to become monks in my monastery, candidates. And so how on earth can you let that person come into your temple? So give them a chance. Open the door of your heart to them. And they become amazing monks. And these are the sort of monks who become far better than me later on. I'm trying to start to introduce, there's some of the people who've been through difficulties, depressions, schizophrenia, been to jail. I haven't been to any of those places. I'm deprived. And I say that because the old simile of just, the truckload of dung simile, or let's say it as it is, a truckload of shit. Life is like that sometimes. That, you go home after a beautiful talk, a beautiful evening, I hope. You go back and you find there's a big truckload of dung has been delivered right in front of the door of your house. It's there. 10 cubic meters of the dirtiest, smelliest, stinkiest stuff ever. So what do you do with that? First of all, no one saw it coming. So you can't ring up someone to take it away, you're stuck with it. So you've got two ways of dealing with the dung of life. You can carry it around with you, put it in your pockets, up your shirts, in your bags. I say people actually do that. They get upset and angry at life. They carry around all the stuff which happened to them. You didn't deserve that. You didn't order that dung. It's the first thing to remember, that life is like this. It's not your fault. You didn't order it. But the point is, you can't get someone to take it away from you. It's a waste of time coming to me for counselling. I can't take it away from you. All I ever say is, get out the wheelbarrow and spade and take it round the back in your garden. If you haven't got a garden, you can come and bring it here. We need a bit of volunteer work to help with our gardens. And you find it takes a lot of work digging in the dung of life. But the result of that is you get this incredible garden in the back. Well, the flowers are just more fragrant than ever before. And it's not just for you. Even the postman can smell that and enjoy it. And the fruit in your trees, you get so much and it's so sweet, you come and offer it to the monks and the nuns, I hope. Where does that come from? Because the reason I got this simile was I've met great teachers and great attained monks who can't teach. I wonder, how come they got that so much wisdom? They understand so much, but they can't just relate to people. And the reason is because they didn't have so much shit in their life. The ones who'd really been through it, when they actually eventually start teaching, they're amazing people. Really inspiring. Say, wow, you have dug all that in, and your compassion, your wisdom has been so heavily fertilized. Now you are wise. So this is why that when you see any problems in life, we learn from it. We don't fight them. We don't have conflict with people. We learn from it. Why? So don't try and stop life. Always ask the question, why? Why is it two people can't live together? Why do people have arguments? I don't know why people have arguments. Who's right, who's wrong? I remember Ajahn Brahm telling that he was visiting another monk in Thailand years ago and just asked how things going. He said, it happened to be two nuns in this monastery. This is not just gender specific. Monks have arguments as well. But this day happened to be two nuns. They were arguing. They said, I don't know how to settle this. And Ajahn Brahm said, throw both of them out. They're both wrong. And that's where, he didn't actually go through with that. But this is where he said that sometimes you feel you're right. But if you have an argument, you're wrong. Doesn't matter You think you've got all the facts, but being right is not important. Being in harmony is. Why do people fight? So I was mentioning 2 weeks ago the cause of extremism and terrorism and bombings. Why do people do that? Because I am right. My interpretation of this interpretation of this interpretation of religion is a right one. And you guys are wrong. My teacher would say, anyone who thinks like that, they're always wrong. Doesn't matter if you're a Buddhist. I've got the right interpretation of meditation. My teacher is right, your teacher is wrong. That's not Buddhism at all. What is Buddhism? As I said 2 weeks ago, it's in the heart. It's what creates harmony and peace and gentleness and kindness. That is more important than being right. Get the priorities straightened out. To understand what those priorities are, I should have mentioned this story 2 weeks ago, but I'm thinking about it now because when I go overseas next weekend, I won't be here next Friday, I'll be in Toronto. There's a conference there, that global conference we had a couple of years ago here. That whole series is going to be in Toronto. So that's why I have to go there. So I was the one who suggested, if you can remember, I suggested, where are we going to have the next global conference on Buddhism? I said, why don't we do it in Toronto? I should have kept my big mouth shut. Now I have to go over there. But I like the people over there, it's a very nice place. But one of the ladies, who I hope I will see, Janice Priddy, if you're seeing this video, please come and say hello when I visit Toronto. Because she stayed some time in Bodhinyana Monastery in the early days, and her husband was some engineer on a contract here in Perth. And her story was amazing, because after finishing the contract, they didn't have any children. They had a small house here in the days you could afford houses. And so her contract finished, going back to Toronto. How do you go back? Flying. They're a young couple, they had time. They bought a yacht, with the money they made selling their house. And they decided to sail back all the way from Fremantle to Vancouver. The idea being that when they get to Vancouver, they got their asset, their yacht, sell it, and they got the deposit for their next house. Brilliant idea. They're young, enjoying their life together, no responsibilities. So a trip of a lifetime, going in a yacht of the South Seas, all the way to the top end, and don't know how many islands until you eventually get to Vancouver. And they had to get some help. They advertised for another couple, and so 2 couples sailing, trip of a lifetime. She managed to get safely back to Vancouver, and she wrote back and told me the story. I wrote about it in Opening the Door of Your Heart, but it's a very amazing story. When they, middle of the ocean, sometimes people say the middle of nowhere. We were just in the northern suburbs this afternoon, and one of the monks said, this is the middle of nowhere. You don't know where nowhere is. So anyway, really in the middle of the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the biggest ocean in the planet. They had engine trouble. The engine didn't work. So what do? You have to just 2 guys go back into the engine room to try and fix up the problem. And if any of you have ever tried to fix up a machine, especially an engine, when you don't know too much about what's going on, and a cramped space, really hot, you get frustrated. And frustration eventually led to an argument. Do it this way. No, my way is right. Do it this way. No. You're not listening to me. So many people always think they're right. And so eventually they had this big argument. And when you have arguments, to show you how crazy, how mad you are, one of these guys actually threw down his wrench, said, right, that's it, I'm leaving. And when he said that, He was so how mad he was, he actually went to his cabin and washed his oil on his hands, packed his bags, and then when he got up onto the deck, he was in a nice clothes with his bags packed, and he said the two girls, Janice and her friend, almost fell off the boat laughing. They couldn't believe this. He was on a small yacht in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, no land in sight. There was nowhere to go. Nowhere. So he went red in the face and did the only thing he could do. Just turned around, went back to his cabin, unpacked, changed into his work clothes, and went back into the engine room where they fixed up that problem together. And when they arrived in Vancouver safely, she wrote me a letter telling that story and said they're still best of friends. I thought it was a beautiful story. How to end conflict. There's no place to go. Our world, as many of you know, a little yacht in the ocean of space. There's nowhere to go. We have to work out the problem together. No one can say, right, that's it, we're leaving. And even your little relationship, your family, can you really go anywhere? It would be wonderful if there was nowhere to go. It meant you have to work it out. And you can. And you do. You find the means when you have to. So that's one of the reasons why don't give up too easily. You do work it out. There's nowhere to go. And if we can't learn how to solve conflict and problems, always running away, or the other way of getting rid of problems is pest control. You know what pest control means? So getting rid of him, getting rid of her, running away. Sometimes I think that's not really getting the wise answer to conflict resolution. Changing priorities. What's really important in life? When there's nowhere to go, we have to work it out. And if you change priorities, it's amazing that when people do get aggressive in front of you, number one, you realize you getting aggressive too doesn't help. But you being peaceful and kind does help. Even changing the tone of your voice calms people down. But if you raise the pitch of your voice and you start speaking fast, then you find you get agitated. Simple things. Your body language, your speech has a huge effect on solving conflicts. That's why sometimes you get people, I've had this many times, come and see you in break conflict. Try to get them just to come up, not to solve the conflict, but to actually to change the body language, to be peaceful, to be calm, to be kind. And they feed into your body language and thoughts, and that just undermines the aggression and the fear, the tightness, the tension. Anger, aggression, like anything else, is that very tight guitar string. Pulls so tightly. One last thing! It gets so easy to make a sound out of. But when you relax, loosen both ends of the string, nothing makes it upset and angry. You react because you're too tense. You are tense. That is the cause of the conflict. Too much stress in your life, not knowing how to let go, always fighting, never using wisdom. This is a wisdom tradition, not a fighting tradition. That fellow in that train could have very easily restrained and knocked out that drunk who pushed over a pregnant woman. But he wouldn't have learned much that way. by finding the source of the problem. That man had just lost his wife. You can't excuse pushing a pregnant woman like that, but find the cause of it. And there you have much greater solutions. Anyway, that's my little bit on conflict management. Do it a different way. Same way is not working in our world. Okay, there we go. Da da da. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So I try to do things in a different way. Say, brush your teeth in different ways. Sadhu, different way every time. Okay. From Germany, Portugal, Scotland. Oh, great. Nothing from Trump Tower, and nothing from the Pope, and nothing from... Okay, from Germany. Is there a way that you can calm down and make peace so deep that it reaches also your subconscious, so as you carry it around subconsciously? Absolutely. Because if you calm down and make peace, that becomes your habitual tendency. That is actually how I discover whether a person really has understood and got deep into meditation. You try and make them angry. Say an Australian guy comes up and says, I've just gone into deep meditation. I say, impossible. You have to be Asian to really understand Buddhism. You haven't got it in your genes. And if he said, that is racist, Ajahn Brahm, who are you to say that? Whatever it is, you try and use something to upset them. And if they get upset, say, well, it hasn't gone deep enough. But if they just react, oh, okay, fair enough, doesn't matter, then you know that they may have got that peace deep inside. You actually test them out sometimes. So anyway, that's actually, it does go into your deep subconscious. Nothing can actually upset you. Ajahn Brahm, in a difficult political, this is from Portugal, in a difficult political situation in a country where everyone is in the streets fighting, how is it possible to try to help people calm down? Both sides think they are right. Again, if there is a conflict, then both sides are wrong. That's almost like the word of the Buddha. Certainly the word of Ajahn Chah. He said, you're right but not correct. And the other side, you're correct but not right. So instead of fighting together, instead we just... basically, even Winston Churchill said, that's better to draw than war. It's better to find out why. And find out the underlying reasons why people are upset. They've also got something in the past which they can't let go of, which they can't forgive and let go of, still living in the past. If we can train people to live in the present moment and not keep dragging the past up, you know, who did what to whom so many years ago. So, living in the present moment, but if people are in the streets fighting, I remember just the great Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. He was in a protest somewhere, I think against the Vietnam War many years ago in New York or somewhere. And it was turning violent. There was Martin Luther King, I think, was there at the same time. And it was getting very violent, people were getting angry. And he was, because it was the front, walking very slowly. So because he was the front, everyone else had to walk slowly. And just having to walk slowly actually calmed people down. If you notice when people are aggressive, they always move fast. They're not just speaking fast. They move fast and their arms move fast. If you can actually just move slowly when you're angry, walk slowly when you're upset, speak slowly when you really, really want to give someone a tongue lashing. Do everything slowly. It actually diffuses just the anger, the ill will. It's a bit of control, it's a bit of force, but it works. Doing stuff slowly. You find you can't get angry. So sometimes if there's a possibility of a few people just doing things slowly, walking slowly, that might help. But sometimes it's already got a bit too far then. If everyone is in the street fighting, at least you're not, I hope. Help people calm down. Shouting at people just inflames them. So both sides think they are right. They're both wrong if they're fighting. Lastly, from Scotland, what do you think is the best way to deal with people who are rude or passive-aggressive? If they are rude, just laugh at their rudeness. Sometimes people try to be rude to me, and I think it's really funny. Like that lady who saw me years ago, 14-year-old girl, I was just wearing my robe, loading up our car with building stuff. She came out, hands on her hips, looked me up and down. "You're dressed like a girl. That's sick." She really tried her best, but I thought that was so funny. I burst out laughing. And she couldn't handle that. She wanted me to be upset. So what are they being rude to you for? They're only being rude to you to try and get some reaction from you. And if you get the reaction, not getting upset, but getting funny, then finding out how amusing it is, of course, then it totally undermines her goal. And passive-aggressive, what actually is passive-aggressive? I know aggressive, but how can you be passive? That's like an oxymoron.
It's hiding your aggression.
Hiding your aggression. You can't hide aggression. It will come out eventually. So, passive-aggressive, the way to overcome that is always expecting from the world something it can't give you. We do see aggression, we do see violence, we have it in ourselves. When you get angry and upset, you shout that. You shout it and you see it. So first of all, that's part of our life, but there's solutions. I say that's sometimes the thing I learned from my mother and father, seeing them argue with one another, small house. You couldn't escape. When they got upset at one another, they shouted, and after a while they just refused to speak to one another. But it didn't last that long. And then they made up. And that was the best part, to see your mother and father just hug and kiss and say, "I forgive you. Yeah, I forgive you too, sorry." And that's what I learned, just seeing that anger, getting upset at one another is normal. It's natural. Don't say there's something wrong with it, because that is almost even worth it, to see the making up, the resolution afterwards, which was just so enjoyable to see. Your mother and father saying, "I'll forgive you, never mind. Our love was more important." So, number one, it happens. You're in a bad mood, bad day. But when it does happen, always get the sweet part of conflict, which is the resolution when people make up. The sweet part is the best. So anyway, that's when you've dug in the dung and the flowers start to bloom. Without the dung, there'll be no flowers. Without the stinky fertilizer, there will be no sweet fruit to offer to the monks tomorrow. Thank you. Okay, now let's finish off and pay respects to Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Sawakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sanghang Namami.